Alright, in this video what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over the structure of the government in the res publica and particularly focus on the three elements and each of the magistrates and what they do and what they're responsible for, etc. So, first and foremost, there are three sections. You have the Senate, which of course in the res publica is the dominating power. They are the ones who basically dictate what gets done, how it gets done, etc. Which is counterintuitive in that they pass no laws. Senate passes no laws. They pass what instead are known as consulta. Consulta means decrees or advice. It's just advice. But whatever they pass is essentially carried out by the second element of the Roman government, which are what are known as the magistrates. These are the governmental officials who carry out what the Senate says. And then you have the third group of people, which are the assemblies of the people. They are the ones who actually make laws. They are the ones who actually declare war. But the only way by which they are called into being, so that they can meet the whole of the general population, is that they are called in and met by these magistrates. So let's say I'm a consul. I listen to the Senate who tells me what to do. I then go and convene a meeting of the committee at, let's say, Centuriata, and I then get them to vote on it, and they're going to vote on it the way that I tell them to. So, but essentially, the people who are truly pulling all the strings is that of the senators. So, let's first focus on the magistrates. And so, there we go. Alright, so this is what is known as the cursus honorum. Cursus honorum literally means the course of offices. Cursus honorum, or duties if you would like, and there are only three. That's the first step, that's the second step, that's the third step, and you have to follow the steps, each one in that order. So the first thing that you enter into politics is that you become a quaestor. Quaestors, which are 20 in number, this is only after the Sullan reforms for these offices, are essentially the financial officers, the guardians of the treasury, the ones that control the purse strings. Once you become a quaestor, you automatically get to join the exclusive club of the Senate, and you then remain a senator for your whole life. Now, you can either wait until you are of age that you can run for the next step, which is that of praetor, or after you've served your 1 year, and that's how long you serve in each one of these offices, 1 year, or what you can do is that you could become, if you would so wish, either an aedile or a tribune. Now, aediles and tribunes are not a part of the cursus honorum, but you could step into the role of aedile before you make your jump directly to praetor, or you could make your jump directly to praetor. Now, let's say you are an aedile. So, you've already been elected quaestor, you served your 1 year, you wait until you gain an age to where you become an aedile. Aediles are those that are responsible for public administration. They're the ones who make the roads better. They're the ones that make the water supply better. Essentially, the infrastructure of Rome. They're the ones that, of course, guide entertainments and make the entertainments for the people. You can imagine that would be an advantageous thing to be, because if you gain the favor of the people, then that means that obviously when you are running for praetor, whatever that might be, you might get more votes, and that's certainly what you want. So they are the ones that dealt with the grain supply, the entertainments, the public games, streets, water, etc. Now, there were two aediles. One was known as the curule aedile. Those would be those exclusively of the patrician class, and then you had the plebeian aediles, as it were. Now, when you serve in the role of aedile, you step out of the Senate, serve for that 1 year, and then you step back into the Senate. That's why all of these guys always listen to the senators, because they themselves are senators. It's just that for that 1 year in that magistrate position. Your first word is going to be quaestor. Q-U-A-E-S-T-O-R. That's your first word. Your second word to put in is aedile. A-E-D-I-L-E. Now, the tribunes of the plebs. Early on in the Roman government, there was a most uneven two groups of people. You had the patricians, who had all of the power, money, influence, but were only about 5% of the population, and you had the plebeians, who didn't have any of that power. And so early on in the Roman period, the res publica, there was created a position known as the tribune of the plebs. They were the ones who protected the plebs from the power of the patricians. They had the power to veto. So whatever law these guys, as patricians early on, got the assemblies of the people to pass, they could always say, veto. There were 10 of them. And you served 1 year until Gracchus came along, Tiberius Gracchus, who decided he would try and run, obviously, for tribune again in 133, and that's why the Senate obviously stirred up mob violence and got him killed. It begins that time of higglings and fickleness that I talk about, because here he realized, Gracchus, and he's the first person to do it, not just to realize it, but to do it, to realize and to carry out the potential power of the tribunes, because they could go behind the back of the Senate, don't have to listen to any sort of the advice the Senate might give, and they could go directly to the assembly of the people and have them pass a law. That is why the Lex Hortensia up to 87 BC was so important, because originally the laws passed by that assembly of the plebeians applied only to the plebeians. After the Lex Hortensia of 287, their laws applied to everybody. And so, as a tribune, I could go directly to the Comitia Tributa, and I could get them to pass whatever laws without listening to a single thing that they had to say. Now, if you wanted to, however, after having been elected quaestor, directly move up to the next step, that could be then praetor. These were the people who acted like judges, as it were. And they, of course, served, as does everybody, one singular year. And you can read that all on your own. By the way, that is your third item. Praetor, praetor, as it were, or praetor, if you would like. Then the next step in the cursus honorum, and remember the cursus honorum is only quaestor, the money guys, praetor is the judges guys, the goal is that of consul. To be consul is the height, it's the pinnacle. And the best way to get there is belong to a family that had gotten there before. It matters most what family you belong to. That's why people like Marius is so remarkable, is that they get there, and they are the first person ever in their family to get there. The people who do that are going to be known as a novus homo, literally a new man. But you are not going to be a novus homo if your dad had been consul, your granddad had been consul, and so forth and so on. Big famous families like the Cornelian Scipios, or like the Aemilius family, they had so many people that had gotten to the top spot. They were two consuls, you serve for one singular year, and you're like co-CEOs, you're like co-presidents, as it were. You command the army in war if necessary. And that is the peak. That is the pinnacle. Now, you have also these other two elements. First is that you have built into the government the position of dictator. Let's say in a time of crisis and in a time of emergency, what the Senate can do is the Senate can say, we are going to appoint a dictator, but the most key thing is for 6 months. They realized that if a dictator kept on being dictator, he might consolidate power and never step aside. And what he would then do is he would choose a deputy known as the Magister Equitum, the master of the horse. And those two guys then single-handedly, with him in power, would deal with whatever emergency at hand. You saw it most famously with Cincinnatus. Cincinnatus took care of his thing that was an emergency in 16 days at the Battle of Mons Algidus and handed the power back over. But then you also see people like Sulla, who had made themselves dictator for much longer than 6 months as intended, and thus you see the crumbling of this system in the late Republic that we are now in the midst of. The other person, or the other thing that you see on here, is the office of Censor. Censor, technically, has to be someone who has been consul, but Censor is not the goal. Censor is going to be those that are elected, not every year, like these guys, and they don't serve for only 1 year, like these guys. Instead, they are elected once every 5 years, and they serve for 18 months. They maintain an official list of citizens, they take the census, they award public contracts, and they control public morals. So for example, if they look in the Senate and they see a guy that they think, the censors, 2 of them, is not living up to his moral obligations, he's living a sinful life, they can boot him out. And so therefore, to be a censor needs to be someone who themselves is of an old school moral upstanding. The 2 most famous guys to serve as censor is going to be none other than Cato the Elder, who was an old school Roman, and Appius Claudius Caecus, the guy who obviously built the road, Appius Claudius the Blind. Now, we have here the Roman Senate, who again only gives advice, consulta, but those guys listen to the advice because when they are not being a consul, they are in the Senate, but they step out that 1 year. Well, then the third item that you have of the Senate, the magistrates, is that then you have the assemblies of the people. You have here the Comitia Curiata. They are mostly patricians, and their function was mostly religious. You have the Comitia Centuriata, who elects the higher magistrates. Those would be obviously, yes, there we go, Up here, the consuls and the praetors are elected by the Comitia Centuriata, and then over here you have the Comitia Tributa. And so let's say I am a consul. I am told by the Senate in our negotiations and in our meetings that this is what needs to happen. This law needs to be passed. I could then go to the Comitia Centuriata and I call together in a meeting of that assembly. I have them vote on this particular law, and in my influence of following the advice of the Senate, I get them to pass whatever it might be. That's why we see the breakdown at the end of the Res Publica, because the tribunes, with the beginning of Tiberius Gracchus, realizes that this can be subverted. You can go directly to the Comitia Tributa, and you could have whatever law passed that you would like that would then be applicable to everybody, all the assemblies as it were. So, that's the way that it works, but it starts to break down. It starts to break down with the two groups of the populares, who go directly to the tribunes, directly to the people, versus the optimates, who still listen to the Senate and its consulta. Remember, that just means decree or advice, as it were. And once you have now the breakdown of the Senate versus the people, the populares, who use the tribunes, it begins to fall apart. Especially now that you have then people who have personal armies, because remember, the men are going to be loyal to you, the commander, instead of Rome as a whole, because you can allow the Capiticensi, those non-landowners, into your army. You can then say, I'm dictator. I'm dictator for longer than 6 months. And so, the higgliness and pigliness that I always draw in my timeline between the years of 133, and that flashpoint was the death of Tiberius Gracchus, who had tried to exploit the power of the tribune and be elected tribune for a second year in a row, all the way down until 31 BC, which is the final battle of the final civil wars. All of it is higgliness and pigliness because this whole system is breaking down for the three parts. The Senate, the magistrates, and then down at the bottom, the assemblies of the people. So, those are they. Know what each one of them are. So, your third item, I don't know if I've already said it, I think I did, was praetor, P-R-A-E-T-O-R. That's your third item. Your fourth item is consul, the chief CEO, C-O-N-S-U-L, consul. And your fifth item is going to be that of tribune, T-R-I-B-U-N-E-S. Or I should say, leave off the S. T-R-I-B-U-N-E, tribune. And those are your items to put in. So, that's the Roman government. Hopefully you are familiar with it and understand how it causes all of that wild time at the end of the Res Publica. Thanks for watching.